The silence that followed was deafening. 4 highly trained operatives lay unconscious on the marble floor of the Westfield Public Library, their weapons scattered uselessly around them. Margaret Foster adjusted her reading glasses, smoothed down her cardigan, and returned to stamping due date cards as if nothing had happened. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Quiet, please, she had whispered. And they had become very, very quiet. Earlier that Tuesday afternoon, the Westfield Public Library had hosted its monthly security assessment meeting. The building, constructed in 1892 with soaring Gothic arches and reinforced stone walls, served as the crown jewel of the city's cultural district. Recent federal grants had transformed it into a state-of-the-art research facility, complete with rare book collections worth millions of dollars and digital archives containing sensitive historical documents. Director James Whitmore had called the meeting to address growing concerns about the library's vulnerability to theft or vandalism. The building's antique architecture, while beautiful, presented numerous security challenges. Multiple entrances, hidden passages between floors, and countless alcoves created blind spots that modern surveillance systems struggled to monitor effectively. "We need professional consultation," Whitmore announced to the assembled staff. "The insurance company is demanding upgraded security protocols, especially for the rare manuscripts collection." The security team from Blackwater Consulting arrived precisely at 2 p.m., their black SUVs occupying the library's circular driveway with military precision. Team leader Colonel Richard Hayes, recently retired from Army Special Forces, stepped out wearing tactical clothing that seemed deliberately intimidating for a library consultation. Hayes was accompanied by 3 specialists: Elena Rodriguez, a former CIA operative who specialized in facility penetration testing; Marcus Webb, an ex-Navy SEAL with expertise in close-quarters combat scenarios; and Thomas Anderson, a surveillance technology expert who had worked with various federal agencies on classified installations. The team's arrival caused considerable disruption among the library's usual afternoon patrons. Students looked up from their textbooks, elderly researchers paused their genealogy work, and mothers with young children gathered their belongings uncertainly. Margaret Foster, the head librarian, continued her routine duties without acknowledging the commotion. She had worked at Westfield Public Library for 12 years, maintaining the same quiet efficiency that had made her indispensable to 3 different directors. Her daily responsibilities included managing reference requests, cataloging new acquisitions, and ensuring that the library's atmosphere remained conducive to serious study and research. At 52, Margaret presented the perfect image of a dedicated public servant. Her graying hair was always pulled back in a neat bun. Her clothing consisted exclusively of conservative blouses and wool cardigans, and her wire-rimmed reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. She spoke in measured tones, moved with deliberate purpose, and seemed to embody everything people expected from a career librarian. Colonel Hayes surveyed the main reading room with obvious skepticism. "This facility presents numerous tactical challenges," he announced loudly, causing several patrons to look up in annoyance. "Multiple access points, limited sight lines, and civilian populations that would complicate any security response." Margaret approached the group with the same polite firmness she used to enforce library policies. "Gentlemen, I'll need to ask you to lower your voices. This is a study environment, and many of our patrons require concentration for their research work." Hayes turned toward her with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, we're conducting a professional security assessment of this facility. Our consultation takes priority over reading activities." "I understand your purpose," Margaret replied calmly. "But library policies apply to all visitors regardless of their business here. If you need to conduct discussions, I can provide you with one of our conference rooms, where you won't disturb other users. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Webb, both recognizing the type of bureaucratic obstacle that complicated their assessments. They had encountered similar resistance from school administrators, museum curators, and other civilian staff who failed to appreciate the importance of security evaluations. "Listen, lady," Webb interjected with obvious condescension, "we're here to protect this place from real threats. Your book-stamping routine isn't exactly a priority when we're talking about professional criminals or terrorist activities." Margaret's expression remained unchanged, but she made a note on her clipboard with particular precision. "I see, and your assessment methodology involves disrupting normal operations and intimidating the people who use this facility daily?" Hayes decided to establish authority through demonstration. "Anderson, run your preliminary sweep. Rodriguez, check the basement access points. Webb, evaluate sight lines from the main entrance. Let's show the librarian how professionals handle security concerns." The team began their assessment with deliberate disregard for library protocols. Anderson set up electronic equipment that beeped loudly while scanning for surveillance devices. Rodriguez moved through the stacks, opening restricted doors and examining areas that were normally off-limits to visitors. Webb positioned himself at various locations throughout the reading room, speaking into his radio about tactical positions and defensive capabilities. Their activities generated increasing complaints from library patrons. Graduate students couldn't concentrate on their dissertations with constant electronic noise. Elderly researchers found their usual reading areas occupied by men discussing weapons placement and defensive strategies. Parents with children began leaving, unwilling to expose their families to conversations about violence and tactical operations. Margaret approached Hayes again, this time carrying a substantial policy manual. "Colonel, I've reviewed our institutional guidelines regarding disruptive activities. I'm afraid your team's current methods violate several regulations that govern appropriate conduct in public facilities." Hayes laughed dismissively. "Ma'am, your policy manual isn't going to stop armed intruders or sophisticated theft operations. We're trying to identify vulnerabilities that could cost lives if this facility is ever targeted by professionals. And I'm trying to maintain an environment where citizens can access information and educational resources without fear of intimidation," Margaret replied. "Perhaps we could find a compromise that addresses both concerns." Webb moved closer, clearly frustrated with civilian resistance to their authority. "Lady, you have no idea what real security threats look like. This building is a joke from a tactical perspective. Anyone with basic training could penetrate this facility and cause serious damage before local police could respond." "Really?" Margaret asked with genuine curiosity. "And you base this assessment on your extensive experience with library security?" Rodriguez joined the conversation, sensing an opportunity to educate a naive civilian about security realities. "Ma'am, we've evaluated hundreds of facilities across multiple threat categories. Libraries like this one are particularly vulnerable because staff members have no training in threat recognition or emergency response." "I see," Margaret said thoughtfully. "So you believe that civilian staff are fundamentally incapable of protecting institutional assets or maintaining security during crisis situations?" Anderson paused his electronic scanning to contribute his expertise. "That's exactly right. Civilians panic during emergencies. They make poor decisions under pressure. They lack the training necessary to identify genuine threats or implement effective countermeasures." Hayes nodded approvingly at his team's educational efforts. "This is why institutions like libraries need professional security consultation. Your job is checking out books. Our job is dealing with dangerous people who might want to exploit this facility for criminal purposes." Margaret adjusted her reading glasses and made additional notes on her clipboard. "I appreciate your candor about our limitations. However, I should mention that your assessment methodology seems to overlook certain important factors, Such as? Webb asked with obvious skepticism. Well, Margaret said quietly, you've spent considerable time discussing theoretical threats and security vulnerabilities, but you haven't actually tested whether this facility can be protected by existing personnel during a genuine emergency situation. Hayes frowned at the implications of her statement. Ma'am, we're not here to play games or conduct training exercises. We're here to evaluate realistic security requirements based on professional threat assessment protocols. Of course, Margaret agreed. But wouldn't your assessment be more accurate if it included realistic testing of the facility's current defensive capabilities? You've identified numerous vulnerabilities, but you haven't determined whether those vulnerabilities could be exploited successfully by actual intruders. Rodriguez realized where the conversation was heading and decided to end it definitively. Ma'am, with all due respect, this facility has no defensive capabilities. You have an elderly staff, no security personnel, no weapons, no tactical training, and no emergency response procedures that would be effective against professional criminals. You're absolutely certain about that assessment? Margaret asked. Completely certain, Hayes confirmed. This building represents everything that's wrong with civilian security thinking. Pretty architecture, government funding, and naive staff who believe that politeness and policy manuals can substitute for real protection. Margaret closed her policy manual and set it aside. Well then, perhaps we should test your hypothesis. Under more realistic conditions, Webb laughed outright. Lady, what exactly are you suggesting? That you and your book-stamping colleagues could somehow defend this place against trained professionals? Not exactly, Margaret replied with the same quiet tone she used when explaining library procedures to new patrons. I'm suggesting that your assessment might be based on incomplete information about this facility's actual security capabilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hayes checked his watch, already losing interest in the conversation. Ma'am, we've been professional and patient, but our time is valuable. If you have specific questions about our preliminary findings, we can discuss them after we complete our evaluation. I do have one specific question, Margaret said. If this facility were actually threatened by hostile operatives right now, how long would it take for your team to neutralize them? Anderson looked around the reading room with professional assessment. Depends on their training and equipment, but probably 3 to 5 minutes for complete facility control. And how confident are you that library staff would be unable to interfere with such an operation? Rodriguez answered definitively, 100% confident. Civilians don't fight back effectively against professionals. Margaret nodded thoughtfully, then walked to her desk and pressed a button that activated the library's emergency lockdown procedures. Heavy security doors sealed all exits, bulletproof barriers descended over windows, and the buildings advanced. Security system engaged with a soft electronic hum. Hayes reached for his radio. What the hell are you doing? Testing your hypothesis, Margaret replied calmly, as 4 figures in tactical gear emerged from concealment positions throughout the reading room, moving toward the security consultants with professional precision. Quiet. Please, Margaret whispered. What happened next defied everything the Blackwater consulting team thought they knew about library operations and civilian capabilities. The 4 tactical figures moved through the reading room with a synchronization that suggested months of coordinated training. They wore no visible identification, carried no obvious weapons, and made absolutely no sound as they approached the security consultants from multiple directions simultaneously. Colonel Hayes reached for his sidearm, but his hand never completed the motion. The figure approaching from his left, a woman who appeared to be in her 60s, wearing a floral dress and sensible shoes, applied a pressure point technique that instantly numbed his entire right arm. His weapon clattered to the marble floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent reading room. Elena Rodriguez, trained in multiple martial arts disciplines and experienced in close-quarters combat, found herself facing what appeared to be a teenage boy in a library volunteer t-shirt. She launched a textbook defensive strike that should have incapacitated any civilian attacker. Instead, the boy redirected her momentum with minimal effort, using her own force to send her stumbling backward into a reading table where she struck her head and lost consciousness. Marcus Webb, the former Navy SEAL, had positioned himself near the main circulation desk for optimal sight lines throughout the facility. His tactical advantage evaporated when a man in a janitor's uniform emerged from behind the reference section and demonstrated combat techniques that Webb had never encountered during his military service. The engagement lasted exactly 7 seconds, ended with Webb unconscious on the floor, his radio and tactical equipment secured by someone who clearly understood their operational significance. Thomas Anderson, a surveillance expert, had been monitoring his electronic equipment when the lockdown began. He managed to activate an emergency beacon that should have summoned immediate law enforcement response, but the signal died as soon as it transmitted. A woman wearing a librarian's badge appeared beside his equipment station and began systematically disabling his devices with knowledge that suggested advanced technical training in electronic warfare. Through it all, Margaret Foster continued her routine duties behind the circulation desk. She processed returned books, updated patron records, and maintained the same calm efficiency that characterized her daily work. The only acknowledgement she gave to the tactical engagement occurring throughout the reading room was her quiet request for appropriate noise levels. The entire confrontation lasted less than 90 seconds when silence returned to the library. The 4 Blackwater consultants were secured in positions that prevented movement while ensuring their physical safety. Their weapons and communication equipment had been collected and placed in a neat arrangement on Margaret's desk, catalogued with the same methodical precision she applied to new book acquisitions. The elderly woman in the floral dress approached Margaret with a slight nod. "All secure, Mrs. Foster. No injuries, minimal disruption to facility operations." Margaret looked up from her paperwork with the same polite attention she gave to patron inquiries. "Thank you, Dorothy. Please ensure that our guests are comfortable while we complete the security assessment they requested." Dorothy Mitchell, 73 years old and a library volunteer for 8 years, adjusted the tactical equipment she had secured from Colonel Hayes with the efficiency of someone familiar with such procedures. "Should I prepare the conference room for debriefing?" "That would be appropriate," Margaret replied. "I believe our consultants will have questions about our security protocols once they've had time to process their observations." The teenage volunteer who had neutralized Rodriguez approached Margaret's desk carrying Anderson's electronic surveillance equipment. Despite his apparent age, he handled the sophisticated devices with obvious expertise, quickly identifying their functions and potential security implications. "Mrs. Foster, their scanning equipment detected our defensive systems, but they didn't recognize the signatures. Should I prepare a technical briefing on our countermeasures?" Margaret considered the question while stamping due dates in returned books. "That won't be necessary, Kevin. Our guests were conducting a preliminary assessment, not a comprehensive evaluation. They've received sufficient information for their initial report." Kevin Huang, 19 years old and a computer science student at the local university, had been volunteering at the library for 2 years while completing advanced coursework in cybersecurity and electronic warfare. His volunteer duties included maintaining the library's computer systems, but his actual responsibilities extended to significantly more sophisticated activities. The janitor who had subdued Webb wheeled his cleaning cart to Margaret's desk and began organizing the collected weapons with practiced efficiency. Despite his maintenance uniform and unassuming appearance, Robert Turner moved with the controlled precision of someone whose custodial duties included responsibilities that weren't listed in any official job description. "Ma'am, should I notify building security that we've completed the penetration test?" Turner asked while securing the confiscated equipment in specially designed compartments within his cleaning supplies. Margaret shook her head slightly. "This wasn't a penetration test, Robert. This was a consultation that became a practical demonstration of existing security capabilities. Our guests will need time to incorporate these observations into their professional assessment." The woman, who had disabled Anderson's surveillance equipment, approached with a detailed technical report printed on official library letterhead. Janet Pierce, officially employed as the library's IT coordinator, had spent the past hour conducting electronic countermeasures that would have impressed military specialists in information warfare. "Mrs. Foster, I've documented their scanning procedures and identified the frequencies they used for external communication. Their equipment was sophisticated, but not beyond our defensive parameters." Margaret accepted the report and filed it in a folder marked Security Consultations, with the same routine efficiency she applied to all administrative documentation. "Thank you, Janet. Please ensure that their equipment is returned in perfect working condition. We want to maintain positive relationships with professional consulting services." The library's normal operations continued throughout the tactical demonstration with minimal disruption to patrons or scheduled activities. Students in the quiet study areas had noticed the brief commotion, but assumed it was related to moving furniture or installing new equipment. The children's story hour in the basement continued without interruption, guided by volunteers who maintained their educational responsibilities. Regardless of security activities occurring on other floors, Colonel Hayes regained consciousness. First, finding himself secured in a comfortable reading chair with his tactical equipment arranged neatly on a nearby table. His training included extensive experience with hostile capture scenarios, but nothing had prepared him for regaining awareness in a public library where normal activities continued around him. As if nothing unusual had occurred, Rodriguez awakened to discover that her head injury had been treated by someone with medical training. Her weapon had been professionally secured, and she was positioned in a location that provided optimal safety while preventing interference with library operations. Her confusion deepened when she realized that the tactical engagement had ended without violence, injury, or property damage. Webb's military experience included capture and interrogation scenarios, but he had never encountered a situation where overwhelming tactical superiority had been demonstrated through methods that left no evidence of confrontation. His equipment had been secured, his communication devices disabled, and his mobility restricted, but he had received better treatment than most prisoners of war could expect. Rodriguez interrupted with barely controlled frustration. "Sir, your staff neutralized 4 highly trained military professionals using techniques that aren't taught in civilian programs. Your building contains defensive installations that require significant government funding. Your employees have access to classified technology and advanced training resources. This isn't a normal public library." Whitmore nodded thoughtfully while reviewing documentation that appeared to contain detailed profiles of each Blackwater team member. "Ms. Rodriguez, I appreciate your professional curiosity, but Westfield Public Library operates according to standard municipal guidelines and federal regulations. Our staff receive training appropriate to their responsibilities, and our facilities meet all applicable safety and security requirements." Anderson pulled out his electronic equipment and began conducting scanning procedures that had detected no anomalies during their initial assessment. This time, his devices revealed signatures that indicated advanced electronic countermeasures throughout the building, systems that had been invisible during their preliminary evaluation but were now clearly detectable. "The electronic signature has changed," Anderson reported. "During our initial scan, this building appeared to have standard civilian systems. Now I'm detecting military-grade electronic warfare installations, encrypted communication networks, and defensive systems that operate on classified frequencies. Margaret Foster approached the group with a cart full of technical manuals that she began distributing to each team member. The documents contained detailed specifications for equipment they had never seen before, operational procedures that weren't part of any standard training curriculum, and theoretical frameworks for defensive strategies that exceeded current military doctrine. Gentlemen, I've prepared some reference materials that might help you understand our operational parameters, Margaret explained while handing Hayes a manual titled Integrated Civilian Defense Protocols, Advanced Applications. In public facilities. Hayes opened the manual and found detailed diagrams of the library's defensive systems, complete technical specifications for equipment that officially didn't exist, and operational procedures that demonstrated military planning expertise. Documentation was professionally produced, extensively footnoted, and classified at levels that required security clearances he didn't possess. Mrs. Foster, where did you obtain these materials? Hayes asked while reviewing procedures for coordinated, defensive operations that surpassed anything he'd encountered during his military service. Margaret adjusted her reading glasses and consulted her ever-present clipboard. Colonel, these are standard reference materials for public library operations in facilities that serve diverse community security requirements. I assumed your assessment would benefit from understanding our established procedures. Webb examined his copy of the manual and discovered sections covering advanced tactical coordination, electronic warfare applications, and siege defense strategies specifically adapted for civilian facilities. The content demonstrated expertise that exceeded military academy curricula while maintaining focus on protecting civilian populations and preserving normal community operations. This manual contains information that's classified above my security clearance level, Webb announced. Some of these procedures are theoretical concepts that haven't been tested in operational environments. How does a public library have access to developmental military strategy? Margaret returned to her desk and resumed her normal duties, leaving the Blackwater team to study documentation that challenged everything they thought they knew about civilian capabilities, public library operations, and the nature of community defense in modern American society. Quiet, please, she reminded them gently. Other patrons are trying to concentrate on their research. Thomas Anderson couldn't sleep for 3 nights after the library incident. His professional reputation was built on understanding electronic systems and identifying security vulnerabilities, but the Westfield Public Library had revealed capabilities that defied his expertise. He began conducting research that would consume the next 2 weeks of his life. Anderson started with public records, searching for any unusual funding sources or construction contracts associated with the library's operations. The municipal budget showed standard allocations for books, utilities, and staff salaries, but nothing that could explain advanced defensive systems or specialized training programs. However, buried in federal grant databases, Anderson discovered something intriguing. The library had received a series of educational enhancement grants from an organization called the American Literacy Foundation over the past 7 years. The grants totaled $2.3 million annually, far exceeding what any public library would require for normal operations. Further investigation revealed that the American Literacy Foundation existed only as a registered nonprofit organization with no physical address, no listed board members, and no public activities beyond providing grants to select libraries across the United States. The foundation's tax filings showed assets that suggested significant government backing, but the funding sources were hidden behind layers of shell corporations and trust arrangements. Anderson cross-referenced the foundation's grant recipients with other unusual incidents he could find in law enforcement databases. What he discovered made him question everything he thought he knew about public library systems in America. 17 libraries, across 12 states had received similar grants from the American Literacy Foundation. Each facility had been upgraded with educational technology that included sophisticated communication systems, enhanced security measures, and staff training programs that weren't described in any publicly available documentation. More remarkably, these 17 libraries had been involved in incidents that suggested capabilities far beyond normal civic institutions. Bank robberies had been foiled by alert librarians who provided law enforcement with intelligence that resulted in arrests. Terrorism investigations had received crucial breakthroughs from research assistance provided by library staff who somehow accessed information unavailable through normal channels. In Portland, Maine, the Central Public Library had prevented a kidnapping when staff members demonstrated community awareness that helped locate missing children within hours of their disappearance. In Phoenix, Arizona, library employees had assisted federal agents in dismantling a drug distribution network by providing research support that included surveillance capabilities normally available only to law enforcement agencies. Anderson realized he was looking at evidence of a nationwide network of public libraries that served functions completely different from their apparent civic mission. These facilities were staffed by individuals with training that exceeded anything available through normal educational or municipal programs. Elena Rodriguez used her CIA contacts to investigate the library staff members who had demonstrated such extraordinary capabilities. What she found in classified personnel databases made her understand why the Blackwater team had been so thoroughly outclassed. Dorothy Mitchell, the 73-year-old volunteer who had neutralized Colonel Hayes, appeared in military records as former Army intelligence with deployments to classified locations during the Cold War. Her official service record had been sealed, but fragmentary references suggested involvement in operations that required advanced combat training and psychological warfare expertise. Kevin Wong, the teenage computer specialist, had no official military background, but his academic records showed coursework that wasn't available through normal university programs. He had somehow completed advanced cybersecurity training, typically restricted to NSA personnel, and his transcripts included evaluations from instructors whose names appeared in classified research projects. Robert Turner, the janitor with advanced detainment skills, had served 23 years in Army Special Forces before disappearing from official records 8 years ago. His personnel file contained references to specialized reassignment and continuation of service in alternative capacity, but no details about his current activities or responsibilities. Janet Pierce, the IT coordinator who had analyzed their surveillance equipment, held degrees in electrical engineering and computer science from institutions that provided advanced training to intelligence agencies. Her employment history showed gaps that corresponded with classified projects involving electronic warfare and information security. Rodriguez discovered that each library staff member had backgrounds that qualified them for positions requiring the highest levels of security clearance. But they were all officially employed as civilian public servants with no apparent connection to government agencies or military operations. Marcus Webb conducted physical surveillance of the library, hoping to identify patterns that might explain how such a facility could operate without attracting official attention. What he observed during 2 weeks of covert monitoring challenged his understanding of normal community operations. The library's daily visitor patterns included individuals who didn't fit typical patron demographics. Military personnel in civilian clothing conducted research using specialized databases that weren't accessible through normal library systems. Federal agents met with library staff in conference rooms that were electronically secure against surveillance. Foreign nationals with diplomatic credentials made regular visits that seemed unrelated to books or educational resources. Webb documented vehicle traffic that included unmarked government cars, military transport vehicles, and communication vans. equipped with sophisticated electronic equipment. The library's parking area accommodated visitors, whose security protocols exceeded those used for most government facilities. Most intriguingly, Webb observed training exercises conducted in the library's basement during evening hours when the facility was officially closed. Through long-range surveillance equipment, he witnessed tactical drills that involved scenarios clearly designed for defending civilian populations against hostile forces, using methods that weren't taught in conventional military programs. Colonel Hayes used his military contacts to investigate the broader implications of what they had encountered. His inquiries led to conversations with defense contractors and intelligence officials who seemed surprisingly familiar with alternative community defense programs that operated outside normal government oversight. One contact, a retired Pentagon official who spoke only on condition of anonymity, provided Hayes with disturbing information about the scope and purpose of the library network they had discovered. What you encountered in Westfield is part of a program that was initiated after 9/11. The official explained during a secure communication. The government realized that traditional emergency response systems couldn't protect civilian populations against sophisticated terrorist attacks or foreign infiltration. They needed assets embedded in communities that could provide defense capabilities while maintaining normal civic operations. The program, officially designated Community Resource Integration, had established covert defensive capabilities in public facilities across the United States. Libraries, schools, hospitals, and other civic institutions were staffed with personnel whose training exceeded normal civilian requirements, but whose activities remained invisible to normal oversight mechanisms. These facilities serve dual purposes. The official continued. They provide normal community services while maintaining capabilities that can be activated during national security emergencies. The staff members have extensive training in intelligence gathering, tactical operations, and emergency response, but they operate under civilian cover to avoid public awareness or political complications. Hayes realized that the Blackwater team had stumbled upon a network that represented a fundamental change in how America defended itself against domestic threats. Instead of relying solely on military and law enforcement agencies, the government had created civilian assets who could protect communities while maintaining the appearance of normal public operations. The library's defensive demonstration hadn't been an anomaly. It had been a glimpse into a nationwide system that prepared for threats that conventional security measures couldn't address. Anderson's electronic analysis revealed the technical infrastructure that supported this network. The libraries were connected through communication systems that operated on frequencies normally reserved for military and intelligence operations. They shared information through databases that provided access to resources far beyond what civilian institutions would require for normal educational purposes. Rodriguez discovered that the library staff members weren't just individually trained, they were part of coordinated teams that could provide mutual support across state and regional boundaries. The network was designed to operate independently of normal government agencies while maintaining the capability to coordinate with federal responses when necessary. Webb's surveillance had documented evidence of a program that represented a new model for homeland security, one that embedded defensive capabilities in the civilian infrastructure that hostile forces would never suspect or prepare to counter. The Blackwater team had conducted a security assessment of a public library and had discovered a network that redefined the concept of community defense in modern America. They had encountered proof that the most effective security measures might be hidden in plain sight, operated by people who appeared to be ordinary public servants, but possessed capabilities that exceeded anything available through conventional military or law enforcement resources. Margaret Foster had demonstrated more than exceptional marksmanship or tactical skills. She had revealed the existence of a system that protected American communities through methods that remained invisible to both enemies and allies. ensuring that defense capabilities remained available while preserving the democratic values they were designed to protect. Margaret Foster's transformation from military intelligence officer to head librarian began with a conversation that changed the trajectory of American domestic security forever. 15 years earlier, Major Margaret Foster had been conducting threat assessment briefings at the Pentagon when Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Catherine Brooks, approached her with an unusual proposition. The meeting took place in a secure conference room 3 levels below the official building directory, in facilities that existed to discuss programs that couldn't be acknowledged through normal government channels. Major Foster, your analysis of domestic vulnerability patterns has identified problems that our current security infrastructure can't address. Brooks began, referencing classified reports that Margaret had prepared about gaps in homeland defense capabilities. We need solutions that operate outside conventional military and law enforcement structures. Margaret's intelligence work had focused on scenarios that kept national security officials awake at night. Foreign agents operating in American communities with impunity because they understood that law enforcement agencies were restricted by jurisdictional limitations and constitutional protections. Terrorist cells established support networks in suburban areas where they could blend seamlessly with normal civilian populations. Sophisticated criminal organizations that exploited the openness of American society to conduct operations that threaten national interests. The problem isn't our military capability or our intelligence gathering, Margaret had concluded in her final Pentagon briefing. The problem is that our enemies understand American society better than we do. They know we won't turn our communities into police states, so they exploit our commitment to civil liberties as a tactical advantage. Deputy Director Brooks had been developing a response to exactly this vulnerability. The Community Resource Integration program would embed defensive capabilities within the civilian infrastructure that hostile forces would never suspect. Libraries, schools, hospitals, and community centers would be staffed with personnel whose backgrounds included advanced training in intelligence operations, tactical response, and emergency coordination. We're not militarizing civilian institutions, Brooks explained during their initial conversation. We're civilianizing military capabilities. The personnel will be genuine public servants who provide real community benefits while maintaining skills that can protect those communities when conventional security measures prove insufficient. Margaret understood the philosophical implications immediately. The program represented a fundamental shift from reactive security measures to proactive community defense. Instead of waiting for threats to manifest and then responding with overwhelming force, America would embed protective capabilities within the social fabric that enemies sought to exploit. The training program that transformed Margaret from military officer to civilian librarian lasted 3 years and took place at facilities that didn't appear on any government maps. Located in rural Montana, the Civilian Integration Training Center occupied a complex that appeared to be a defunct corporate retreat, but contained some of the most advanced educational resources ever assembled for a single purpose, Margaret learned library science from professors who held advanced degrees in information management and had spent decades developing systems for organizing and protecting knowledge resources. But she also learned combat techniques from instructors whose backgrounds included the most elite military units in American history. Electronic warfare from specialists who had designed countermeasure systems for national security agencies. Psychology and social dynamics from researchers who understood how communities responded to crisis situations. Most importantly, she learned the philosophical framework that would guide her new career. The program's core principle was that effective community defense required genuine community service. Personnel couldn't merely pretend to be librarians or teachers or healthcare workers. They had to excel in those roles while maintaining capabilities that transcended normal civilian requirements. Your cover isn't a deception, explained Dr. William Harrison. the program's director and a former CIA deputy director who had designed unconventional warfare strategies during the Cold War. Your civilian identity is your primary mission. The defensive capabilities are secondary responsibilities that activate only when community protection requires skills that exceed normal institutional resources. Margaret embraced this philosophy completely. During her 3 years of training, she developed genuine expertise in library operations, information science, and educational resource management. She studied literature, history, and research methodology. With the same intensity she applied to tactical operations and intelligence analysis. When she graduated from the program, she was as qualified to manage a major public library as any civilian with equivalent education and experience, but she was also trained to coordinate defensive operations that could protect her community against threats that local law enforcement couldn't handle. Electronic warfare capabilities that could disrupt hostile communications while maintaining normal library services. Combat skills that could neutralize armed intruders without endangering patrons or damaging valuable collections. Intelligence analysis methods that could identify potential threats before they manifested as active dangers. The Westfield Public Library position represented the culmination of everything Margaret had learned during her transformation. The facility had been selected specifically because it served a community that included defense contractors, university researchers, and government employees who might attract hostile attention from foreign intelligence services or domestic extremist groups. Margaret's 12 years of service at Westfield had been genuine in every respect. She had helped thousands of patrons with research projects, managed budgets and staff schedules, coordinated educational programs, and maintained collections that served legitimate community needs. Her professional reputation was built on authentic accomplishments that would have satisfied any municipal oversight or library science evaluation. But she had also recruited and trained a team whose capabilities exceeded anything available through normal civilian employment. Dorothy Mitchell's volunteer work with senior citizens provided cover for maintaining combat readiness and situational awareness skills developed during decades of military intelligence operations. Kevin Huang's computer assistance to students allowed him to develop and test cybersecurity measures that protected the library's advanced communication systems. Robert Turner's custodial duties included maintaining security systems that were hidden within the building's architecture, while Janet Pierce's IT responsibilities extended to electronic warfare capabilities that could defend against sophisticated cyber attacks. Each team member provided genuine community services while developing skills that remained available for situations that exceeded normal security requirements. The Community Resource Integration Program had established similar teams in strategic locations across the United States, creating a network of civilian assets who could respond to threats that conventional security measures couldn't address. But each team operated independently, developing specific capabilities based on their communities, unique requirements, and threat profile. Margaret's team had been activated only twice during their 12 years of service. The first incident involved foreign agents who had attempted to use the library's research facilities to access classified government databases. The second had been a domestic terrorism investigation that required surveillance capabilities beyond what local law enforcement could provide. In both cases, the team had resolved the situations without public awareness or official recognition. The Blackwater incident represented something different, a test of whether their defensive capabilities could be demonstrated without compromising operational security or revealing the program's existence. Margaret had made the decision to conduct the tactical demonstration because she recognized that the security consultants represented the type of professionals who might encounter similar situations in other locations. Our effectiveness depends on maintaining civilian identity while developing capabilities that exceed civilian limitations. Margaret had explained to her team during their post-incident debriefing. The demonstration served multiple purposes. It tested our coordination under pressure. It educated security professionals about alternative defensive resources, and it established credibility that might prove valuable in future operations. The philosophical foundation of Margaret's work went beyond tactical capabilities or intelligence operations. She genuinely believed that libraries represented everything worth protecting about American society: open access to information, democratic participation in community decisions, and educational opportunities that allowed citizens to develop their full potential. Regardless of background or circumstances, her defensive skills existed to protect these values, not to restrict them. The Community Resource Integration Program had been designed to preserve American freedoms by ensuring that those freedoms couldn't be exploited by enemies who understood their tactical value. Margaret's willingness to demonstrate her capabilities to the Blackwater team reflected confidence that her true mission would remain protected while her community continued benefiting from genuine library services. "Quiet, please," she had whispered, not as a threat or intimidation, but as a reminder that libraries existed to provide environments where people could think, learn, and grow without fear of disruption from forces that threatened the foundations of democratic society. Her request for silence had been both literal and metaphorical, a commitment to protecting the peace that allowed communities to flourish while ensuring that protection remained invisible to those who might seek to destroy it. The ripple effects of the Westfield Library demonstration began appearing within days across the national security community. Blackwater Consulting submitted their official report to the Municipal Contract Office with language that had never appeared in previous security assessments. Instead of recommending additional guards, surveillance equipment, or access restrictions, their report stated, "Facility demonstrates adequate defensive capabilities through existing personnel and infrastructure. No additional security measures required." Colonel Hayes found himself fielding inquiries from other security firms who had heard rumors about an unusual library consultation that had challenged conventional assumptions about civilian facility protection. The story spread through professional networks with the kind of whispered speculation that surrounded classified operations that couldn't be officially discussed. Private military contractors began incorporating new scenarios into their training program: situations where civilian facilities might possess defensive capabilities that exceeded standard threat assessments. The library protocol became unofficial terminology for approaching institutional security consultations with greater respect for unknown variables and hidden resources. Within 6 months, federal agencies responsible for Homeland Security began receiving reports about unusual incidents at public facilities across the nation. A school in Nebraska had prevented a shooting through coordinated response that suggested tactical training among staff members. A hospital in Oregon had neutralized a terrorist threat using methods that exceeded normal emergency procedures. A community center in Texas had foiled a kidnapping attempt through surveillance and intervention capabilities that local law enforcement couldn't explain. Each incident shared common characteristics: professional execution by civilian personnel, minimal public disruption, and official reports that attributed success to alert staff and community cooperation rather than acknowledging extraordinary defensive capabilities. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore among intelligence professionals who understood the implications of coordinated defensive actions that transcended normal civilian training. Deputy Director Catherine Brooks found herself briefing congressional oversight committees about a program that had exceeded all operational expectations while maintaining complete public invisibility. The Community Resource Integration Initiative has demonstrated effectiveness that surpasses conventional security measures, Brooks reported during a classified session. Embedded civilian assets have prevented dozens of incidents that would have resulted in casualties, property damage, and community trauma if addressed through traditional response protocols. But the program's greatest success was its ability to maintain normal community operations while providing protection that remained invisible to both hostile forces and civilian populations. Libraries continued serving patrons, schools educated students, and hospitals treated patients without any indication that these facilities could defend themselves against threats that would overwhelm conventional security measures. Margaret Foster's demonstration had become a case study that was discussed in classified training sessions without revealing her identity or the specific location where it had occurred. Security professionals learned about the importance of recognizing defensive capabilities that didn't announce themselves through obvious markers, and the value of approaching civilian facilities with respect for unknown variables. The Westfield Public Library experienced subtle changes that reflected its new status within professional security networks. Municipal funding requests for library operations received approval with unusual speed and minimal oversight questions. Federal grant applications were processed through expedited channels that suggested someone in Washington was ensuring adequate resource allocation for important community assets. More significantly, the library began receiving visitors whose research needs extended beyond normal public information resources. Military historians conducting classified research, intelligence analysts requiring access to specialized databases, and federal investigators needing secure meeting facilities discovered that certain public libraries could accommodate requirements that exceeded standard civic capabilities. Margaret's daily routines remained unchanged, but she noticed that her interactions with patrons increasingly involved people whose backgrounds suggested professional awareness of the library's dual nature. Retired military officers conducting genealogy research who demonstrated tactical awareness of facility security. Academic researchers whose questions revealed knowledge of classified historical events. Community volunteers whose skills seemed perfectly suited for maintaining the library's enhanced operational requirements. The network of community resource integration facilities had achieved something unprecedented in American security operations. They had created defensive capabilities that strengthened rather than restricted civilian society. Instead of turning communities into fortified zones that limited freedom and accessibility, the program had embedded protection within the democratic institutions that made freedom possible. Dorothy Mitchell's senior citizen outreach programs began attracting volunteers whose backgrounds included military service, law enforcement experience, and technical skills that exceeded normal retirement activities. The volunteer coordination took on aspects of tactical team building, but always within the context of genuine community service that provided real benefits to elderly residents. Kevin Huang's computer tutoring sessions drew students whose academic interests aligned remarkably well with cybersecurity requirements and electronic systems maintenance. His teaching responsibilities evolved into informal training programs that developed next-generation capabilities, while maintaining focus on educational achievement and career preparation. Robert Turner's facility maintenance duties expanded to include coordination with contractors whose specializations involve security systems, communication equipment, and defensive installations that could be integrated into normal building operations without attracting attention from casual observers. Janet Pierce's IT coordination responsibilities grew to encompass network management for multiple community facilities, creating redundant communication systems that provided mutual support while maintaining the appearance of routine technology sharing between municipal institutions. The library's influence extended beyond its immediate community as other facilities adopted policies and procedures that had proven effective at Westfield. Quiet please became more than a request for appropriate noise levels. It became a philosophy that emphasized respectful behavior and awareness of community standards that made democratic institutions possible. Training programs for library Professionals began including modules on crisis management, emergency coordination, and community security awareness without explicitly acknowledging the defensive capabilities that some facilities maintained. The goal was to ensure that all library staff could contribute to community safety while maintaining focus on their primary educational and informational mission. Professional conferences for librarians, educators, and community service administrators began featuring presentations on integrated community response and civilian emergency coordination that provided frameworks for thinking about public safety in ways that complemented rather than competed with law enforcement and military capabilities. The legend of the Westfield incident spread through security communities as an example of assumptions that could prove dangerous when dealing with American civilian institutions. The story served as a reminder that appearances could be misleading and that respectful professional behavior was essential when evaluating facilities whose purposes might extend beyond their obvious functions. Margaret Foster achieved something that few security professionals ever accomplished. She had demonstrated extraordinary capabilities while reinforcing rather than undermining confidence in civilian institutions. Her willingness to reveal defensive skills had proven that democratic values and community safety were compatible goals rather than competing priorities. Years later, when security consultants approached public facilities for assessment purposes, they remembered the library where a quiet request for appropriate behavior had been accompanied by a demonstration that civilian personnel could protect their communities without sacrificing the openness that made those communities worth protecting. Ultimate lesson of Margaret's demonstration wasn't about combat techniques or tactical superiority. It was about the possibility of maintaining freedom and security simultaneously through institutions that served both purposes with equal dedication and professional excellence. In libraries across America, the simple phrase, "Quiet please," carried additional meaning for those who understood that some protection operated most effectively when it remained invisible, and that the most important battles for democracy might be won by people who preferred stamping books to receiving recognition for their role in keeping communities safe. Margaret Foster had whispered two words that created silence, but her legacy echoed through a network of civilian guardians who understood that the loudest victory was often the one that made no sound at all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.